The low, quiet hum of the quadrotor drone was drowned out by the squeals of delight of the children invited to Dee Dee's 12th birthday party. The parents of Dee Dee's 5 invited friends had dropped them off early, and now all 6 girls were playing in the backyard, waiting for the message that the cake and ice cream were ready. I sighed thinking about it. Our backyard? Yes, this was our backyard until the final divorce decree about 2 months ago. Now it was just my backyard, except that it also indirectly belonged to my son, Dylan, 14, who sat on the patio watching everything with contrived indifference, and my daughter Deanna, we call her Dee Dee, 11. Well, 12 as of today. Thus the birthday party. My little princess was only a year away from adolescence. God help me! We've survived Dylan's rite of passage. Well, for now. Now all I had to do was find a way to help Dee Dee navigate this minefield on the road to womanhood without guidance or help. Damn! It's a special day for Dee Dee, the last birthday of her childhood before entering the dramatic, luxurious, and painful season of adolescence. I had already decided a few days before that I would not allow the joy of the day to be overshadowed by thoughts of Dee Dee's mother bitch, my ex-wife Donna. Instead, I would focus on giving Dee Dee an unforgettable time and on preparing for the entertainment I had organized with my friend and now partner in our exciting and promising to be profitable business venture, Nirmal Pradhan. Easy, Diz, I said to Nirmal as we operated our remote-controlled aerial platforms with the tablet controllers we each had in our hands. You don't want to drop them too soon. They might get away in time and we'll miss the full effect. Just make sure you aim second low over the back fence and hit the lights at the right time, my Indian origin friend replied. Once you get them focused away from the real threat, then bomb. In the 6 years he lived in the United States, he had almost lost his sing-songy rhythm of speech, typical of subcontinent residents. Moreover, living in Tennessee for 4 of those 6 years had led to a southern softening of his English pronunciation and the introduction of terms like y'all into his everyday vocabulary. Sometimes he even joked with me that in Knoxville, he had learned that y'all was singular and all y'all was plural. 6 teenage girls celebrating a birthday were moving around the backyard, looking at the quadrocopter hovering above them. It made a low humming sound, traveling in one direction for a short distance and then hovering again. The girls followed it, only to find themselves below it. It moved again in the other direction about 20 meters away, and the girls rushed in that direction. Beneath the quadrotor drone that was moving about 8 meters above them, the one we called Enola Gay, was a round object with ribbons around it. We led the girls to believe that it was an aerial piñata and that at the right moment it would drop small candies on them. So far, we had kept the other quadcopter, the one Deez and I called E.T., out of sight. It was operated only by me, and for the moment it was turned off. It was quietly preparing to fly in a small clearing in the woods on the other side of our fence. I set aside the tablet controller to reach for a bottle of Budweiser Black Crown. I'd been choosing this beer more and more lately, as I felt the need for a slightly higher alcohol content after the unpleasant events of my divorce. But I wasn't going to get drunk tonight since I was going to be driving later. I just liked the taste of it. So I limited myself to 2 drinks. I coughed, swallowing wrongly because I was distracted for a moment by her appearance. I knew Dee Dee had invited Donna, my ex-wife, to her party. But it still upset me when I saw her walking out the back door onto the patio as if she owned the place. Still the arrogant queen bee, lording over everyone who came within her bad influence. She surprised me since I hadn't noticed her car pull up. I had to cough a couple times to clear my airway of the beer that had accidentally gotten in there when she distracted me for a split second. Donna still looked good, but not as spectacular as she had a few months ago. Her shoulder-length blonde hair, green eyes, and fantastic body always made passers-by, if not stop, at least slow down. Now she was still very attractive, but she had put on a little weight, which I'm sure she resented. The status of most attractive woman, which she had claimed for most of her life since she turned 15, was now in jeopardy. Placing the wrapped package on the table reserved for Dee Dee's gifts, she looked directly at me. At first, there wasn't the slightest expression on her face, but then it quickly changed from brief delight to a lack of any emotion, then to a brief moment of sadness, followed by a clear look of determination to accept this moment. She sighed visibly, trying to feign a polite, welcoming smile. Glenn, was all she said as she walked over to where I stood. Donna, was all I answered, turning to look at our daughter and her friends. I made several successful attempts to release the tension that crept into my body from her mere presence. She could still excite me, but these days it was a different kind of excitement. I looked at my watch and noticed that time was slipping away from me if I wasn't more attentive. I set the beer bottle aside and picked up the tablet controller. "It's time, Diz," I said to my friend, who was standing a few feet away from me with a controller in his hands. Focused on controlling the Enola Gay, I couldn't tell if he even knew Donna was here. But I knew that, other than the fact that he would find her presence here mildly distasteful, he didn't really care one way or the other. "Good," he replied, simply nodding as he maneuvered Enola Gay closer to the back of the yard and closer to the fence. I picked up my tablet controller and tapped the spot that was supposed to activate the ET remotely. I didn't hear it come to life outside our backyard fence, but I noted the system status indicator on my tablet, which reported that all systems were operational, as they say at NASA. When Diz moved the Enola Gay a little to distract the girls, I lifted the ET out of its seat and moved it to a height from which it could barely traverse the trees on its way to our yard. On the inset screen at the bottom left of the tablet screen, I could see what the ET was seeing, with a miniature camera transmitting a signal over a carrier wave in the wireless frequency band to my controller. With another on-screen control unit, I could remotely move the camera so that its field of view rotated in a 360-degree arc on the gimbal mount and even zoom in and out. But that wasn't really necessary today. Nor was the remote recording capability built into the tablet controller necessary. The girls were so focused on Enola Gay that they didn't notice ET coming down the hill, traversing the last of the trees on his way to our back fence. I heard Donna beside me take a deep breath in surprise at seeing ET. She was about to yell a warning when I growled at her. "Not a sound!" I didn't look at her, but I could tell she was a little pissed off. I hadn't uttered a rude word to her before our divorce proceedings began, and she wasn't used to receiving them. I don't know if it was the determination in my voice or her surprised momentary indignation that made her exhale instead of calling the girls in and ruining the surprise. I only know that for her own reasons, she chose to remain silent while I remotely guided the ET over the back fence and moved it closer to where the girls were clustered, but out of their sight. I alternately touched 2 points on the control screen, quickly engaging the 2 ET capabilities needed to accomplish the surprise. 2 very bright red and green strobe lights began to flash alternately as the ET soared at a height that was a head taller than the tallest girl in the group. A fraction of a second later, a sound effect erupted. "Whoop! Whoop!" came a loud signal that mimicked the booming of a police cruiser. The girls shrieked and turned in unison to see the frightening sight of 2 bright flashing strobe lights directly above and behind where they stood. In that moment of paralysis, I heard Diz utter, "Bombs away!" And as I looked up from my clipboard, I saw Enola Gay release a round, ribbon-adorned object hanging below her. The object had fallen only a meter when a sudden explosion with a slight pew-pew erupted from its bowels, and the object disintegrated above the girls' heads. Pieces of tape exploded all around them, just seconds after they were hit by a light jet of water that erupted into a cone 6 meters in diameter as a result of the explosion of the plastic CO2 gas that detonated inside the balloon. As the Enola Gay started back toward the patio and Diz, I saw a string with the remnants of the detonation device dangling under the landing gear. None of the bomb's components had shattered enough to harm the girls. "Dee," I heard Dee shout, partly indignant and partly joking, as she turned and saw Deez and I laughing at them. I knew she was mostly reacting to being startled by the suddenness of the event Dee and I had orchestrated. The spray of water from the balloon wasn't enough to ruin their clothes or, God forbid, their hair. Dee had already started stomping over to where I was standing with Donna to express her displeasure when I heard Donna next to me make a sound like gagging. Turning toward her, I saw Donna's eyes wide open and her mouth slightly ajar. She was clearly surprised, but there was also something else. That something became apparent when she turned to me with an expression of fury and contempt. "It was you, you bloody bastard!" she said in a low whisper. Then she came right up to me and slapped me across the face. Good thing I didn't touch the tablet controller screen when I jerked back from her blow, or I might have smashed the ET or had it hit one of the girls when it moved. As it was, the ET just hovered in place. She pulled herself together and said, You know, sometimes you can be a real son of a bitch. Not known for my wit and ability to come up with quick retorts, I surprised myself by replying rather quickly. You mean without being a real Class A slut who cheats on me all the time? Donna's face flushed, and she froze, contemplating how to repeat the slap she'd received a minute earlier. But as Dee Dee came over to me and put her arm around my waist, Donna pulled herself together and squatted slightly in front of Dee Dee, so that she was at the level of our daughter's face. Happy birthday, sweetheart. She reached out to touch Dee Dee's shoulder, and my daughter let go of me to walk over to her mother and put her arm around her waist. Donna, though she didn't seem particularly comfortable with this public display of affection, she'd never been one to consciously show affection with anyone, especially me in public, nevertheless hugged Dee Dee and said, I'm afraid I can't stay. I just came by to bring your present and tell you that I love you, and of course to wish you a happy birthday. Donna's voice was pleasant enough, but she was staring at me intently. I didn't care anymore, and now I didn't care whether she realized the source of her recent suffering or not. I simply reached for the bottle of beer and took a sip, then set it on the table. Then I touched the tablet controller screen and landed the ET, then touched the screen again to shut down the ET's Wonkel engine. Donna turned and started to walk away, and Dee Dee let go of her mother and came back to stand next to me. I guess there came a point in her life where hugging your father around the waist with all your friends standing around and witnessing everything that was going on wasn't so cool anymore. Just as Donna reached the patio, Sandy Malloy came out of the back door of the house and called, Who wants cake and ice cream? The girls ran to the picnic table where paper plates and plastic utensils were laid out, and Sandy set out the cake. Seeing each other at the same time, Donna and Sandy held each other's gaze for a moment. Then Donna looked back at me, leaned over and shook her head, flipped me the bird, obviously not caring that her daughter and friends might see it, and strode toward the house to her car parked out front, I guessed. No! Sandy and I weren't a couple or anything like that. This wasn't one of those stories where the cheating guy has a bunch of divorcees or office girls, or even younger sisters-in-law, waiting to try it on when he finally divorces his cheating wife. While that might have been fine, that wasn't the case in this instance. Sandy was a single mom to 11-year-old Virginia, my daughter Dee Dee's girlfriend. Sandy had gotten pregnant while still in high school, but never married. Seeing that I had my hands full with the party, she volunteered to stay and help. Sandy had been to our house many times over the past 3 years, either to drop off or pick up Ginny, or to be part of the parental control cell at one of the then DDD's meetings with little girls to which Ginny had been invited. So, naturally, Sandy was privy, thanks to her daughter's close association with mine, to more details than I would have preferred concerning the crisis that had developed in my marriage and its subsequent dissolution last year. After Donna left, the girls enjoyed cake and ice cream with Sandy, Diz, and me, then opened presents and handed out handfuls of little candies that the girls had felt cheated out of some time ago, after the event with the fake piñata and its wet surprise. Afterward, Diz and I gave the girls a brief description and demonstration of E.T. and Enola Gay, while we fiddled with 2 drones in the backyard. Of course, the more acceptable term these days is unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, since the term drone has fallen into disfavor with civil libertarians who object to the government's use of military and police versions of these vehicles domestically and with nominal American citizens fighting terrorists against U.S. interests overseas. While the FAA was still delaying approval and licensing of commercial UAVs until 2015 or even later, Dees and I were doing all the necessary basic research and testing we could afford. We regularly maneuvered 2 UAVs at minimum altitudes and on private lands nearby to be on the cutting edge of the UAV business when FAA restrictions were lifted. We probably broke a whole bunch of rules, but we laughingly told ourselves we could keep it up as long as we stayed literally under the radar. Haha. We also had foreign contracts and cash advances to produce new copies, and even better versions, of the E.T. and Enola Gay from 2 Diz cousins in India. These 2 brothers were already planning to introduce drone delivery, not restricted by Indian laws. Here in the U.S., only the CEOs of Amazon.com and Domino's Pizza have publicly announced this so far. 2 Indian entrepreneurs dreamed of becoming commercial leaders throughout Southeast Asia in the use of UAVs for remote sensing, electromagnetic, biological, and chemical. Commercial aerial movie production was also a lucrative area. Bollywood, the home of the Indian film industry, was already demanding their products. Add to these efforts oil and gas exploration, and even mineral exploration, and mountain rescue. Many mountaineers from around the world needed emergency supplies while waiting to be rescued in the Himalayas. We talked about the possibility of getting a lot of money, or rupees as the case may be. I was quite surprised at the size of the advance and the promise of a lucrative reward. After all, Dees and I had only been doing this since he finished his master's degree last year while interning in the UAV research program. The FAA gave final approval for large-scale UAV research at only 3 universities: Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Dees was involved in the UAF program when he started renting a room from us. Diz was working hard to earn his degree while interning at the UAF test sites at Pendleton, just a few miles south of the Oregon-Washington border, and Tillamook, on the Oregon coast, just west of Portland. He came to us at a time when Donna and I were in desperate need of short-term extra income and decided to rent a room in a house. Diz was the first to respond to the ad, and although Donna was hesitant at first about renting to a foreigner on a student visa, she eventually relented. Diz moved in a week after we first met. Since my house was in Woodland, Washington not far from Vancouver and north of it, along the Columbia River, it allowed us to get to Pendleton in about 3 hours and to Tillamook in 2 hours. Dees had to travel to these places only during tests. The rest of the time, he did his graduate school coursework, working from my house, but after my divorce, I let him live there for free. Although Dees's name was Nirmal, everyone called him Dees, and he didn't seem to mind. Someone had learned that the word Desi was a Sanskrit term for the people, culture, and products of the Indian subcontinent or South Asia. From there, it wasn't hard to guess that he could be called Dizzy or Diz. He briefly hesitated when someone first called him Diz, actually for about 5 seconds, but then smiled and agreed, realizing that his acceptance of the nickname coincided with his new friend's acceptance of him as part of our collection of friends and associates. Before my divorce, I had quietly reconnected with Dees after he brought me up to speed on the potential financial tsunami looming in the commercial drone industry. I was already having difficulties in my relationship with my then-wife Donna, especially when it came to finances. She and I had fundamentally different ideas about spending, saving, investing, and planning for our financial future. So I quietly asked my attorney to help me hide my investment in the UAV research and development that Dees was now doing for his cousins after he was released from an NDA related to his college internship. I was glad that the terms of my divorce from this with Donna went through before the terms of my part of the business agreement with Dees and his cousins were finalized. This meant that any profits I made from my new venture were excluded from the divorce agreement and were not available to Donna. After Dee Dee's birthday party was over, we gave one of Dee Dee's friends a ride to her house. Now we were driving home, Dee Dee sitting in the back seat. Dylan sat in the front with me, shaking his head and occasionally whispering words while listening to music through his smartphone and headphones. "Dad," Dylan asked, tapping the phone screen to stop the music. "What does it mean when Elvis Presley says there's no such zone?" It took me a few seconds to shift my mind from thoughts of Dee Dee's birthday party, Donna's brief visit, and her somewhat violent outburst, and the implications of bringing Dee Dee's friend home. Now it dawned on me what Dylan had meant. "Oh, you mean from the old Return to Sender song?" I asked. He nodded, and I continued. "Your Grandpa Taylor, my father, must have told me this when I asked him years ago. He said that when he was a teenager, when Elvis was still alive, young and at the height of his musical powers, the U.S. Postal Service had not yet introduced zip codes. Since most cities in America had only one post office, it was not necessary. But larger cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles had more than one post office, and the cities were divided into delivery zones corresponding to the location of those post office buildings. I looked at him and saw that he was looking out the windshield and nodding understandingly. Then he asked me, "What does it mean when Elvis says he dropped a letter in the mailbox and sent it to Special D?" I replied, "These days when you send a letter or package with special handling instructions, the U.S. Postal Service categorizes it as certified, return receipt requested, priority, express mail, or something like that. Back in the day before they came along, any special handling instructions or rush delivery requests were categorized as special delivery, or, as some people called it, and as you heard in the old Elvis song, Special D. Dylan nodded again and continued listening to his music. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that Dee Dee had drifted off to sleep after all the excitement of the previous night's anticipation and the tedious preparation and execution of her birthday party. I could sympathize. I had to go through it all with her, as well as all the nonsense I had to go through with Donna's appearance today. I pushed aside my irritation at Donna, looked lovingly at Dee Dee, and thought, my little girl, yes, my little girl, is growing up just like her brother. Then my thoughts returned to Dylan's question about the Elvis song he'd heard on the Oldies channel on his smartphone streaming music app. I suddenly laughed out loud, causing Dee Dee to open his eyes and look at me inquisitively in the rearview mirror. Shifting my attention back to the road, I continued to giggle, pondering the line from the song again. Yes, I thought, remembering the most important message I had ever sent to my now ex-wife. I sent it to Special D. The wedding was sudden and unprepared. It was only 2 weeks after Donna and I graduated from high school, and a couple months after we turned 18, she in April and me in May. Donna was pregnant, and everyone thought I was the culprit. Even though I tried to contradict my father and her that she had dated at least 4 other guys while we were dating, my father asked me if I had actually had sex with Donna. When I tilted my head to avoid his disapproving gaze and nodded, he invoked an ancient, undocumented and unofficial, but still observed in some mountain communities, hillbilly legal aphorism. If the maker of a bad check cannot be found, the responsibility falls on the last endorser. A week later, I was supposed to kiss the bride. It wasn't too hard, since I'd been lusting after Donna for over a year. And I actually liked her, despite her apparent preference for playing the field through our entire senior year. Besides, Donna Swinford really was a beauty. In fact, she was the prettiest girl in our class since she became a second grader, and her feminine figure began to blossom. And she knew it too. During her time at school, Donna has used the power of her looks many times. She was considered the queen bee at school. She won over the boys and destroyed the other girls with her looks, comments, and attitude. There were rumors that she'd even seduced a couple of male teachers to get passing grades, but the latter was never confirmed, and to this day, as far as I know, she'd never told anyone. Everything else was common knowledge, though. After we were legally married, Donna's dad offered us the use of a small apartment above his garage to live in while we tried to become parents, work, and pursue higher education. After our baby was born, Donna's mom, though not particularly happy with our living situation, nevertheless enjoyed looking after Dylan during the day while Donna worked at her day job, and I attended community college and worked part-time in the evenings a few times a week. We may not have gotten off to the best start as a married couple, but Donna and I grew as a family and began to enjoy our life together, and even began to experience feelings of true love as far as I could tell. We struggled financially at first, but Donna and I had fairly good jobs. With the pay raise I got when I graduated from community college with a business degree and was hired by a local company, we were able to breathe a little easier. In our first year together, our sex life was amazing. I had never had such a constant supply of sex as I did now that I was a husband. And Donna, who had enjoyed sex even before we were married, enjoyed our sex life immensely. At least it seemed that way to me at the time. Not quite 2 years later, our sexual activity began to subtly decline. We still got together often to lie on the sheets, but I was beginning to notice a decrease in the frequency of sex. And it coincided with Donna's increased time away from home, meeting friends at work, helping her friend host Mary Kay parties, and getting a small cut of the organizers' fees, and attending a walking group for mothers. Only in the last of these 3 activities was Donna able to get Dylan involved, as she was able to wheel him around in a jogging stroller we found at the store with the other young moms and their children in the group. On the other 2 occasions, I stayed home with my infant and then toddler son, or asked Donna's mom to help me when I was working or studying. Anyway, our sexual activity had dropped to perhaps its lowest level since our wedding day when Donna approached me one evening with a concerned look. Dylan, now 2 years old, was playing with the plush dog at my feet while I studied when Donna finally spoke from her seat at the table across from me. "Darling, I'm so sorry," she said quietly with a sad expression on her face. I had to distract myself from a finance problem I was solving as a homework assignment for one of my courses, so it took me a few seconds to respond to her. "Honey, what are you sorry about?" I asked finally. "Glenn, I'm pregnant again, and—" I looked up in surprise, feeling a genuine sense of joy at this news. However, I could tell from the look on Donna's face that the situation didn't bode well for her. "Honey, this is wonderful news," I said, getting up and going around the table to hug her. She didn't get up right away. Instead, I took her hands and pulled her to me for a hug and kiss. Her enthusiasm may not have waned when we started kissing, but eventually she returned the flick of my tongue with her own. I tried to convey to her that I was very excited about the prospect of being a father again. After all, Dylan turned out to be an adorable baby and hadn't yet experienced the terrible twins we kept hearing about from friends. It's been just under 9 months since the night Deanne made her debut into our family. Let me tell you, this little girl had captured my heart from the moment the doctor severed physical ties with her mother, wiped her down, wrapped her up, and handed her to me to take to the scale. I was now an official member of the Squeeze Club as my daughter's father, and at the time, I didn't even know it. "Honey," I asked, stunned, "what's wrong?" Donna pulled herself together and looked at me strangely for a while. Then she smiled mischievously through her tears and said, "Glenn, honey, I'm just so exhausted from labor, and my mind and body are so exhausted from the medications and all my hormones trying to get back to normal. I'm so sorry for all these emotions." For a while, she continued to look at me strangely. At that moment, I couldn't understand what was wrong. Of course, today I know exactly what caused that emotional turmoil. However, at the time, I thought there was something wrong with what she said. But I decided to believe her story out of love for her and our 2 children, as well as my own excitement. "Donna, I know this has all been hard. Right now, you just rest and get ready to go home tomorrow. Mommy Swinford has already got everything ready for the nursery and is looking forward to having us all home, especially little Deanne." I smiled at her with all the love I was capable of at that moment. Donna looked back at me and responded with a smile and a raised eyebrow, one of the nonverbal signals inviting a kiss. I complied, and we both giggled at Deanna's little burp between us. Donna had her tubes tied after Deanna was born, stating that 2 children were enough for her. We talked about it, and while I'm not one to want to block off all avenues to expanding our family, I eventually agreed with her. 11 years later, almost to the exact date, I learned that we had been living a lie for a very long time. As soon as I got my degree and got a good job, as I said, we began to feel the financial burden we had been carrying up to that point lessen. We still had a lot of debts, but now they were manageable. Banks like to categorize debts into good and bad debts. We soon achieved such a balance between good and bad debts that due to recent changes in banking regulations, we qualified for a low-interest home loan. We were also fortunate enough to find a small but cozy home that was affordable due to the bank's desire to generate income from the property that had been foreclosed on when it was abandoned during the divorce proceedings. Everyone was happy. The bank, because it was now making money on real estate. Donna and I, because we now had our own place. Mama and Papa Swinford, because we were finally out of their garage apartment. Well, Mama Swinford wasn't so happy, since she didn't get to see Dylan and Dee Dee as much. When Dee Dee started kindergarten, Donna successfully, but after some hesitation on my part, asked me to allow her to return to work during the afternoon hours when the children were in school. She assured me that she would not allow our family time or special time with the children or me to be diminished or harmed. For the most part, she has kept that promise. Around the time Dylan was about to enter high school in the Vancouver neighborhood where we lived, Grandpa Taylor had to go through the grief of Grandma Taylor's passing. A short time later, he called my dad and me over to his house. "Tom," he said to my father, "I know you and Ruth love your house and don't want to move. That's why I want you to consider letting me give this house to Glenn as a bequest, passing from one generation to the next. It's in good condition and it's paid for." I expected my dad to object to his own father being disadvantaged in this, but he seemed to accept it. After all, he and Mom were not close to being rich, but they were financially comfortable. I was still surprised and asked, "Grandpa, don't you want to stay here, among the memories of Grandma and you together?" "Son," Grandma Taylor said with a sad smile, "this is exactly why I need to move out of here. These memories are so sweet. It makes me sad that she isn't here to talk to me about them. No, I want you to keep this house for your young family, and I'm going to take the old van from the public warehouse and take a trip to see some of the places in the Northwest that I never got to see before I got too old for it." Thus, Donna and I and our 2 children became tenants in my Grandpa Taylor's house in Woodland, north of Vancouver. When the new deed was being registered, Grandpa Taylor insisted that it be in my name only. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I'm glad he did. It made the house somewhat divorce-proof. Had he not done so, it would have been very difficult for me to fight and win the custody battle that arose out of our divorce. Last year, Diz had been renting a room with us for about 8 months when I noticed a change in his behavior. It had taken him a few weeks to loosen up after his first visit, and after that, Donna and I had been able to engage him in conversation with ease. He was even remarkably patient with the almost incessant stream of questions from the then 13-year-old Dylan. DD had accepted D's presence, but still seemed a bit reserved with him. I noticed a change in Deese's demeanor, but figured he must be trying to solve some technical problem with the drones we were experimenting with. Yes, I said, we are. The company I worked for regularly in Vancouver coordinated fairly large-scale catering operations for several airlines flying out of Portland International Airport in Oregon. PDX was across the Columbia River from Vancouver, Washington, just 13 miles down Washington's Highway 14 and I-205. Each day, our suppliers, chefs, packers, and transporters prepared, packaged, and delivered customized airline meals to PDX for the flight attendants on the larger planes to put main dishes and cooked vegetables into in-flight galley warmers and walk through the plane distributing in-flight meals. We prided ourselves on providing quality prepared meals at a very favorable price. The fixed operations coordinator at PDX agreed with this assessment as he renewed his contract with us every year. Because of this, we were a very profitable enterprise. Some of the profits were distributed in the form of periodic bonuses rather than salaries and wages. As a department head, I was the recipient of some bonuses that were surprisingly generous. As I mentioned, early on in our marriage, I realized that Donna and I had very different ideas about managing our finances. To keep my bonus money from becoming a financial river visibly flowing away from my family, I took a number of protective measures. I found an advisory team of 2 brothers, one of whom was a certified financial planner and the other a lawyer. They helped me create an investment portfolio by providing tax and legal advice that came with their services. When the Deese cousins made their proposal via email and then a Skype video conference, I was finally convinced that investing in their venture could be very financially rewarding, and I was willing to take the risk. What I was not willing to do was share the financial benefits with Donna, as it was around this time that I learned about her secret life. In this endeavor, my investment team helped me keep this investment venture a secret from Donna and also helped me meet the deadline before the divorce proceedings were finalized. Why did I withhold this from my wife rather than include it in our family financial picture, you ask? Well, because I finally convinced Deese to tell me what was bothering him. Glenn, Deese said hesitantly, you know I've been testing camera support under the first UAV for station tracking and holding? When I nodded, still embarrassed by his awkwardness, he continued. So the software stabilization is now such that I can hold on to a moving object. In addition, Deese continued, the GPS positioning feature and the UAV's more robust engine now allow me to keep it in a fixed position on the ground for up to 4 hours. The video recording function on the tablet controller allows for even longer video recording, but the determining factor in this case is the time the vehicle is in the air. I knew that wildlife conservationists really wanted these features to be able to monitor herds of bison, caribou, and elk. And the new, quieter Wankel engines we installed didn't make enough noise to scare the monitored subjects in the process, and at the same time, please the environmental noise Nazis. Diz started talking about technicalities that I had no idea about and averted his eyes from me. I sighed and reached up to touch his shoulder, making him look at my face again. Diz, stay on topic. What's got you so worried? I asked. You know I'd like to help in any way I can. I remained convinced that it was all about some complex technical hurdle he had encountered. While I could not provide much help with the technical aspects of our project, I was quite willing to continue to fulfill my part of the obligations of our partnership. Not only did I provide capital, but I offered Deese housing, a place to assemble and test equipment, my garage, and, especially important for focused engineers prone to mood swings, support. Glenn, He paused and thought for a second, looking at me. Then he reached for the controller of his tablet. I'll just show you. His eyes raced as he said this, and he continued with a strange comment, reverting back to his old Indian speech habits. But please don't blame the messenger. Diz picked up the tablet controller, turning on the saved video. At first, I had a hard time figuring out exactly what I was watching. The movement was blurry and uneven at first. That's where the video stabilization worked, he explained, zooming in on the tablet screen as the moving images on the screen began to flow smoothly into each other. I watched the ground beneath the UAV in the video move across the about 9-inch screen. I noticed grass and trees being replaced by asphalt and concrete. Apparently, he was flying the UAV out of an area bounded by fields and forests into more built-up areas. I suppose I could have knocked on your window, but I didn't want to scare you and endanger the UAV. At those words, he sort of grinned. I still didn't understand what he was talking about. Then I realized what I was seeing on the screen. I was looking at me! It was a video of me sitting at my desk and talking toward the speakerphone in my office at work. I heard nothing but the hum of UAVs and the noise of traffic and other activity that one would expect in a commercial district. You filmed that right outside my office window, I exclaimed. Diz only nodded, continuing to watch me. I was impressed with the quality of the video. Of course, I smiled, realizing that our company should pay more attention to the details of our building cleaning and maintenance contract. The window through which I was watching myself in the video from the outside was visibly covered in dirt and in desperate need of cleaning. I couldn't help but grin. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed to a rainbow of pastel and dark colors. The figures that had been on the regular video before were now only visible in outline. But the colors were strange. It felt like I was in the middle of a weather radar image on the Weather Channel. It's an infrared view, Diz said before I could ask. Now that I realized I was watching the video in infrared, I realized that the different colors were actually different representations of heat signatures. The window, since it was in direct sunlight, obviously distorted what was viewed through it because it had its own heat signature. Diz, that's great, I said with a grin. I know the wildlife guys are going to love it when they're trying to track herds. Diz didn't answer anything to that. He pulled back the tablet controller and activated what looked like another video file. He sighed and held it out for me to view. This time the video started in IR mode. From the shapes I could see, I realized that the UAV was hovering over a parked car, which, judging from the heat signatures, had a driver and one passenger in it. As I watched, human figures got out of the car and moved toward the back. The actions on their part were indistinguishable, but it could indicate that they took something from the trunk of the car. They moved away from the car, and I noticed that the angle of the video changed to keep them in view. But the position of the UAV didn't change. I had to go around the tree they moved under after getting the blanket out of the trunk of the car. Diz sounded nervous as he said this. I noticed the sing-songy intonation that characterized the speech of the subcontinent's inhabitants returning to his voice. Diz sighed again as the screen switched from IR mode to video mode. That way, I could verify that the video had been shot in daylight, late morning or early afternoon, judging by the light level. In addition, I was able to make out a nude Donna, my wife, in the arms of Dean Winston. Winston was one of our classmates in high school and was well known as the Horn Dog. He was also one of the 3 or 4 guys Donna was dating when she and I got married because she was pregnant with Dylan. Needless to say, a year before Diz's revelations, I was not thrilled to learn that Dean Winston, after graduating from Boise State University and working in Seattle for several years, had returned to Vancouver. Not only that, he was now working for the same company Donna worked for. How's that for disgusting convenience? The moment Dean and Donna appeared naked on the screen, her lying on her back on the blanket and him between her thighs about to get down to business, I turned away and whined. I shoved my hands in my pockets to keep from hitting something in anger, or anyone. Diz stopped the video and clutched the tablet controller to his chest. I'm sorry, my friend, Dees said. I was just trying to see if the tracking and loitering functions could be tested on easily recognizable people and objects. Thus, I used mostly you and your wife so you could test how well our systems worked. When I started, I never imagined that. Diz allowed his voice to break and fall silent, as I was no longer listening to him at this point. After about 3 minutes of silence in the room, broken only by the heavy sound of angry air coming out of my nose, I finally spoke. Is that the only thing you have? I asked. Diz hesitated for a few seconds and then said, I have 3 other cases recorded, but there have been others. There was silence again. After about 30 seconds, I asked, Is it about the same every time? I didn't really want to know that, but at this point it just had to be said. After all, my thoughts had already shifted to something to do with the dissolution of the marriage. No, Dees replied. From the other 3 videos and from other cases I've observed, it appears that they take long lunch breaks together and drive out to this quiet neighborhood near Vancouver. They usually stay in his car and... Here he just tapped the screen to start another video. The brightness and contrast are very different in this video, and I commented on that. It's because of the rain, Diz said. I nodded. Yes, it rained a lot in the Vancouver and Portland area in the spring. I could see why they wanted to stay in Dean Winston's car when they had their own connections. Hell, I remember Winston bragging about his new car with a huge panoramic sunroof. Some cars with this feature had a solid glass roof, others had multiple panels. All were designed to open up the entire cabin to the sun and tilt back, opening up at least part of the interior to the outdoors. Some people enjoyed the wind in their hair, others just sat and looked at the stars in the evenings. Of course, in the rain, which was quite frequent here in the Vancouver and Portland area, the panoramic sunroof still provided a view, but without having to endure rain in the face or, in the case of the ladies, in the hair. Dean Winston's car was a Chrysler 300S with all the trimmings, including a double panoramic sunroof, which he liked to brag, "Yes, the ladies like to have sex in the luxury of my car while enjoying the beauty of the sun and stars overhead." I heard him say this at least twice at the work parties I was forced to attend with Donna. I never heard my wife mention Dean, nor did I see her do anything at those parties that would make me suspicious. I guess the two of them, my wife and her longtime lover, have gotten good at masking signs of infidelity. When Diz handed me the clipboard so I could see my whore wife's betrayal, I saw that the heat signatures showed the two of them engaged in acts similar to people taking off their clothes in the front seat of a car. In doing so, they kissed frequently. Finally, I saw the passenger move to the back seat and assume what I assume was a hands and knees pose. The driver then moved between the front seats and joined another person in the back seat who apparently approached the passenger from behind. The oscillating heat signatures and movement of the car confirmed what was happening. Before they moved to the back seat, I saw no indication that the driver was attempting any additional action in his groin area, so I assumed it was non-consensual sex, which of course is horrible. Not only was my trashy wife cheating on me, she was jeopardizing my health and possibly my life by exposing us both to an unknown number of this son of a bitch's sexual partners. Diz, I said finally, I'm going to need copies of those videotapes. It looks like my soon-to-be ex-wife and I are going to have a falling out over her extracurriculars, shall we say. I'll also need those videotapes when I petition the court for custody of my children. Diz nodded and said, Given her history, are you sure? He stopped abruptly, but I realized what he meant. Were these children even mine? That had to be tested in terms of biology. But in terms of love, it didn't matter. My babies were my babies! I didn't care who the sperm donor was. I loved Dylan and Dee Dee, and they loved me. I wouldn't give them up without a serious fight, and even after that, I wouldn't rest until I could get them back. Still, Diz was right. Yeah, I should probably get a DNA test, shouldn't I? I'm sorry, my friend, Diz said with an apologetic look. I nodded at him and put a hand on his shoulder encouragingly. The last video was still running, and I sighed. Hey, Diz, I said as anger rose in my thoughts, though I held it back in my voice. Do you have any actual videotapes, not related to these cases? Diz, with a proud expression on his face, stopped the current video and turned on another. This time, the video was running normally, and you could see their heads and faces from behind and just above the back of Winston's car. It only took a few seconds before the view changed again to an infrared view directly above the car. I looked at Diz with a question on my face. I lowered myself behind the vehicle for a few seconds to get a clear shot, Diz replied. However, I was only able to keep the UAV there for a few seconds, barely long enough to get a clear shot before getting out of their sight. I didn't want to alert them to the presence of the UAV and camera. Donna knows the effort that you and I have put into this program, and she's seen some of the demonstrations we've done here. She would instantly recognize a UAV if she saw one, and she would also realize that it was probably filming. I had crossed the threshold of logical thinking in the situation I found myself in today when Diz revealed his secret. Now I had moved to an emotional level. I was hurting on a personal level, but I was also worried about my children. But mostly I was angry and bitter at the two hurrahs I saw in the video. My loving wife not only cheated on me, but put me in harm's way physically by letting asshole baby do her without protection. What infuriated me was the contempt and disrespect with which she conducted this ploy of hers. Oh yeah, divorce is one thing. Revenge was another one! My attorney, Myrna Hawk, had all the paperwork ready by the time Diz and I finally realized our day of vengeance. Sounds like a catchy movie title, doesn't it? I inquired, and Diz confirmed that the cheaters' noon dates happened on Fridays. He informed me that it always happened during the extended lunch break on Fridays. Casual Friday dress code rules allowed them to wear clothes that were easier and quicker to put on and take off. And sometimes on Tuesdays, the day of the week with the least workload. I gave copies of the videotapes that Diz had already given me, burned to DVD-Rs, to Myrna Hawk and asked her the questions necessary to determine how best to serve my wife in a way that would be as painful and embarrassing as possible. She informed me that she could deliver the papers to anywhere within a 20-mile radius of Woodland and even to the northern edge of Vancouver, where Donna's work was located, within an hour, and into the hands of the recipient within 2 hours. I printed one shot of the happy couple as they were having sex in the missionary position on a blanket under the trees. I will include this shot in the divorce packet. The DVD-R with these videotapes should have remained in Myrna Hawk's office just out of precaution. Meanwhile, I surreptitiously took swabs and hair samples from both of my children, the former while they slept and the latter from the hairbrush and comb on their mirrored dressers. It only took a few weeks to get the results. I had Myrna Hawk's office address as my return address. So I was in Myrna's small conference room when I discovered that Dylan was, in fact, all mine. Wow! Looks like Dad and Mr. Swinford were right to make me marry Donna at that time. My hand trembled slightly as I looked over the second set of results. Deanne wasn't mine. Well, biologically. She always would have been mine if I could have helped it. I loved my baby girl too much to lose her in the machinations that my soon-to-be ex-wife was probably up to. The second result hardened my heart even more. This Winston story was obviously not the first time she had spread her legs for another guy while she was married to me. She who was supposed to belong only to me was apparently something of a bus stop for her various lovers, where they could come and go as long as she made a schedule where it could be done without me finding out. Revenge Day had to be chosen carefully, depending on the weather on the chosen Friday. In fact, it took Deez and I another 4 weeks of patiently waiting and concomitantly replenishing our video vault before the right day appeared on the horizon. It was May, and the weather forecast for the coming Friday was not only mostly sunny, but also suggested a surprisingly low humidity level of 15%. Chances were, if the couple didn't get out of the car, they would probably accomplish their feat in the back seat with the panoramic roof open outward. Everything would depend on the weather. But Deez and I were ready to execute either way. Oh, Glenn, are you sure about this? This is so disgusting, Diz complained. We were busy pouring the contents of the bucket into one of several special weather balloons I'd found at a military surplus store. We practiced the bombing capabilities of the UAV, which was now called the Enola Gay. Diz had designed an explosive device using compressed CO2, and we filled one of the balloons with water. Diz carefully inserted the bursting device inside the filled balloon, after which I sealed it, and the thrust cord was brought outside the seal. Around the seal, we attached a few turns of cloth tape and made a loop of it. This loop will be used to hold the remotely activated pizza delivery grabber on the bottom of the Enola Gay UAV. A single tap on the tablet controller screen would cause the grapple to release its load on command. When the balloon lowered far enough to create enough tension on the slackened drive cord, the bursting device released CO2 in a sudden explosion of water, or whatever the balloon's contents might have been at the time. I insisted that we do 3 test launches with water balloons in the backyard. The last 2 rehearsals we did with the UAV with alternating strobe lights, which we now called E.T., after the name of a famous movie in which the spaceship delivering and picking up the movie's main character had many flashing lights. You bet, I said in response to Diz's question. I want them to be in the shit, literally. As I said this, I was pouring more and more of the obnoxious mixture of piss and shit into the big weather balloon. This act was inspired by a car ride when, feeling sorry for myself, I stopped at a small rest stop operated by the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission. This primitive place, which retains green and pristine, as local tree advocates like to say, had an equally primitive outhouse instead of a chemical toilet like most more modern places. Then I smiled wickedly as an idea for revenge hit me. I, like Diz, tried to wear surgical gloves when filling the balloon. Next to us was a bucket with a mixture of bleach and water, as well as some disinfectant. Once we finished filling the balloon, we wanted to carefully seal it and hang it on a hook in the garage while we dipped our hands in the cleaning mixture. It would be hell for Diz and me if, after taking revenge on the crooks, we got hepatitis or something else equally horrible. We also had to make sure we didn't overfill the balloon. Previous versions of the water balloons were a bit fuller, so we could provide a safety margin against the weight and mass of the payload that would be delivered in reality. Now all we had to do was wait another hour or so for Dean Winston and my wife Donna to leave work for their weekly Friday mid-afternoon sex session. I walked over to my tablet controller and started the ET engine about 10 minutes before the crooks usually left the building. After about 30 seconds of warm-up, I lifted the ET from its hiding place in the crown of the trees across the parking lot from the building where my wife worked. I had been practicing with the camera mounted under the ET using a gimbal and had gotten pretty good at changing the orientation of the camera as I moved the platform. When I left the ET in hover mode, I practiced with camera movement and zoom to make sure the mount didn't jam at the wrong moment. I wanted to make sure I captured all the excruciatingly awkward action. I couldn't help but marvel at the fact that I was over 13 miles away from where ET was watching my wife work. Alibi? You bet. Sure enough, Donna and Dean walked out the door leading to the parking lot together, and right on time. They didn't even seem to care what their coworkers thought about it, which probably partly explained the "you poor sucker" looks I'd gotten from some of my wife's coworkers at the last few work meetings. Okay, Diz, we know where they're headed. Let's load up the Enola Gay, I said to my friend. With those words, we carefully removed the filled balloon from the hook in the garage. We had a creepy moment where I almost lost my grip. But we paused, restored my pulse to 650, and carried the balloon over to where Enola Gay was sitting. I left it to Deese to take it from there. He was an expert at attaching the thrust activator for the hopper and the suspension mechanism to carry the payload. I went back to monitoring the ET and moving it into place. I guess I was so focused on what I was doing that I didn't even notice that Enola Gay was on her way until Diz sat down next to me, tablet controller in hand. We looked at each other and shook our fists, then returned our attention to the screens in front of us. The overhead view of Dean Winston's moving Chrysler quickly became boring, but the excitement of what we were doing kept us energized and focused. The trip to the favorite parking spot that Donna and Dean usually used was usually only about 10 minutes, and today was no different. Diz chuckled beside me and said softly, "Oh, yeah." When I asked him what he meant, he grinned and said, "Look at the hatch." Turning and zooming the camera slightly to get a good view, I saw that Winston had opened the panoramic sunroof of his luxury car so they could feel the spring breeze as they drove. I silently prayed that they would leave it open. It had rained the night before, so the ground was very wet. Today, however, the weather was great, mid-60s, mostly sunny, and the humidity had temporarily left the area. Conditions were just right for our purposes. As soon as the car stopped, the couple got out and saw that the ground was too wet to do it on the ground under the trees. They started to have fun. Damn, I thought, she's still a fox even if she's bent over. I noticed in passing that Dean Winston's gear was in the Goldilocks category. Not too big or too small, just noticeably, not livable. I watched and gritted my teeth as my wife, with whom we've been together for almost 15 years, opened the rear passenger door of the car and stepped inside. I started down the ET and captured the moment on video as Dean leaned in and kissed my wife. I couldn't help it. I had to wipe the sudden moisture from my eyes. This marriage had been dying since I discovered Donna's duplicitous nature, but a date had not yet been set. Now it had been set. Today was the day. I kept the ET off to the side, out of their line of sight, and told Deese to start his run. From that point, I slowly and carefully moved the ET to a position below line of sight, and behind the curve of the trunk of the car, the crooks were now entertaining themselves in. I was about to pass out when I heard Deese sound the alarm. "Good!" he said almost with a shout. Catching himself, he said, "One last run, strobe and arrow in 3, 2, 1. And then in a calm voice just above a loud whisper, he said, Now! I raised the ET to the level of the rear windshield. I caught a glimpse of the expression on the couple's faces as I turned on first the strobe lights and then the police signal. Today I covered the strobe lights with a dark blue film. When the bright alternating lights went out, I chuckled briefly, thinking about what must be going on in that couple's heads. The lights looked like the headlights of a police cruiser. Whoop! Whoop! This sound has been almost universally recognized in the United States as a police unit alarm. As planned, the terrified couple stopped moving and froze in place for just a few seconds. Their startled expressions were captured for posterity by the video footage coming from IT. I smiled at their discomfort and congratulated myself for surprising them so thoroughly that I almost didn't hear Diz. Bombs away! I have to admit, I wasn't expecting anything as disgustingly unpleasant as what the ET video capture showed me on the screen. The movement in the car behind the couple in my viewfinder looked like something falling through the sunroof, but it only lasted a split second before the rear windshield, except for the area covered by the couple's heads and shoulders, was covered in a nasty brown film. It took the couple a split second to realize that they were now covered in a brown haze of piss and soft shit, as was the entire interior of Dean Winston's precious luxury Chrysler 300S. They were looking out the rear windshield when Diz's device burst, so there was minimal on their faces, just the remnants of droppings from the ceiling of the car. That was the plan when Diz and I were planning the attack. I had to make sure they were facing away from the bursting balloon of shit, so the shit wouldn't get in their eyes. We didn't want to blind them, or nose or mouth. We didn't want them to swallow any of it. I mean, it's one thing to tell someone, eat shit and shut up. It's quite another to realize that if they ate any of that shit, they might very well get so sick that they die. I wanted revenge on them, not to worry about avoiding a murder charge. Rounds are over, Diz said in a suddenly authoritative voice. Then, already in a softer tone, he said, I believe it is time for marching order, my friend. With those words, we steered the Enola Gay and ET away from the neighborhood, keeping as low as possible. We got them home within 20 minutes and, sipping Budweiser Black Crown beer, cheered each other on. Diz drove off at my direction, leaving me at home to await Donna's ignominious return. I activated the ET again to follow the turn of the main thoroughfare into our neighborhood, and quickly brought it back to us and parked it in the garage when I saw the Chrysler swerve. I had already alerted Myrna Hawk to have her bailiff nearby and on 10-minute standby. She gave me his cell phone number, and I entered it and pressed the button for him to do his thing, just as my wife's lover drove his car down our street and pulled up to my house. My car was parked on the other side of the street, so Donna didn't have to know I was home. I had to admit that Winston's Chrysler was a beautiful car, at least externally. When he put the car in park, I could still see the brown streaks on the inside of the windshield. Apparently, he used an undershirt or something to wipe them off so he could see while he drove. When the passenger door opened, a haggard figure emerged from it. Donna's face was cleansed of the offensive material that had apparently soaked the interior of Dean's car, including all the clothes they had piled in the front trunk while they were doing the deed in the back. I knew this from watching the Enola Gay video while Dean and I were enjoying a beer after surgery. Deece's aim was phenomenal. The shitball entered the car exactly centered through the open panoramic sunroof, and the hopper blew its vile contents just a couple of inches above the center console between the front bucket seats. Enola Gay's camera captured the effect of the brown explosion, which almost instantly spread throughout the car, even into the trunk where their clothes were piled. Only a relatively small amount flew out through the hatch, thanks to the direction of focus that Deez had set. The guy was really quite talented at this. I saw another dark car pull up to the curb, and the driver got out and walked toward my porch. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, and he was carrying a large manila envelope. He crossed the yard briskly and caught up with Donna before she could get to the steps. I broke the window in the front room so the sound traveled both ways, from the outside to the inside and vice versa. He walked over to Donna and began his formal presentation. Donna, I grinned. He started again, fighting the horrible odor that must have been oozing from Donna in all directions. Donna Taylor? He asked, and it sounded like he was trying to breathe through his mouth and speak at the same time. Man, that smell must be really awful. Yes, but I can't talk right now. She said, trying to brush him off. Bless his heart. He persisted and simply said, Here. I looked out the window and saw Donna take the envelope he held out to her. It must have been a reflex. He then quickly headed to his car and called out, walking behind him. "Donna Taylor, you have been served." He snapped a picture of her with his phone, still moving away to capture the event, along with the date and time she was served. The guy was meticulous. Even though he was utterly disgusted by my shit-smelling wife, you gotta hand it to him. Winston wanted to leave right now. He probably wanted to get away from his ex-lover, take a shower, find a handyman who had the guts to fix the car, or an arsonist who would just set it on fire and put it out of its misery, and get on with his life in anticipation of the weekend. It took him a few minutes to pull out of my driveway, as the bailiff's car was partially blocking his way. The server reached into his car, pulled out another envelope, and walked to the driver's window of Dean Winston's car. I didn't hear it, but it seemed to me that the server, having gotten confirmation of Dean's identity, simply tossed the envelope through the window, stepped back to take a picture, and drove off. I guess the odor near the car was as foul as it was near Donna. I moved away from the window so Donna wouldn't see me watching the events happening in my front yard. I heard her sob. I don't know if it was a sob of anger, sadness, self-pity, or a little bit of everything. All I know is that it was loud. After that, I heard a few more sobs. She tried her key and found that it no longer worked. I took the opportunity this morning to change the locks and replace the garage door opener before the revenge mission had even begun. She didn't know if I was home yet, but she still rang the bell and listened. She banged on the door several times and kicked it once with her foot. Then I heard her push against the door and slide down to sit on the porch. It was quiet for a minute. Then I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. I'd turned the ringer off so she couldn't detect my presence in the house. Before answering the call, I made my way to the kitchen. "What?" Usually, when I saw her number in the caller ID window, I would answer, "Hi, honey," or some other affectionate word. But not this time. "Glenn, honey, something terrible has happened and I—" She paused, going into a paroxysm of loud and pitiful crying. I stayed on the line when, after about a minute, she finally pulled herself together. "Oh, Glenn, I can't get into the house. My key doesn't work, and I so need to shower and get cleaned up." Ugh! I almost laughed as I pictured her sitting on the porch crying and feeling the chafing of her shit-soaked clothes. Finally, I spoke up. "Donna, did you get the package I delivered to you?" Yes, she replied. "What's that?" "The rude guy who gave it to me said I was serviced." "What did he mean by that?" I couldn't believe she couldn't figure it out. "Well, I guess you'll have to open it up and see exactly what he meant," I said. I couldn't resist a harsh tone in my reply. I could hear her opening the envelope, probably holding the phone in the hollow between her neck and chin. "Glenn, why are you suddenly being so nasty? Oh, no, no! I instructed Myrna Hawk to see to it that the picture of Donna and Dean fucking in the missionary position on a blanket on the ground was the first one in the divorce packet. From the angle, it would appear to an observer that a tall man with a camera took the picture from about 30 feet away using a zoom lens. The secret of the UAV video will remain with only a few of us. Contrary to most people's expectations, the divorce went a little out of my favor. Perhaps the cheating couple's dated photo helped. I don't know. Since Washington is a no-fault state that does not require a period of separation before divorce, the mechanism moved pretty quickly. I got the house since the deed was in my name only, but had to provide Donna with a bunch of monetary assets, from known accounts. This included only minimal alimony for 2 years, since she was essentially still working. Because the house was mine, the judge ruled that the children's interest would be served if the existing pattern of interaction between parent and child is altered only to the extent necessary because of a change in the parent-child relationship or to protect the child from physical, mental, or emotional harm. Translated into ordinary language, this meant that they should stay in the house with me so as not to change the pattern of interaction. To her credit, Donna did not try to portray me as physically, mentally, or emotionally abusive. If she had tried, I gave Myrna Hawk a list of witnesses who were to attest that I was not abusive. I couldn't completely remove Dylan and Dee Dee from Donna's influence, since the court had also established mutual decision-making authority, which meant that Donna could still have a lot of influence over the kids' lives. Well, I guess given the way courts tend to screw over fathers, and the fact that I wasn't being squeezed out of the car, I could give Donna a little leeway without being too picky. Sure, it would be nice not to have to deal with my ex-wife anymore, but I still had Dylan and Dee Dee. So far, I had shielded them from the infidelity associated with the breakup of their parents' relationship. I planned to keep them in the dark as long as possible. Donna rented an apartment just a few miles from home. Guess who had to pay for it? It was closer to Vancouver and her place of employment. What annoyed me was the requirement that I pay for her cable TV connection. I checked to see if her package included the Cheater channel, but no such luck. I had no interest in whether Donna was dating someone or trying any other relationship. The topic was never brought up during the normal handoff of children for visitation, and I didn't ask. In all, I suffered financially for about 6 months, until the income from the business that Dees and I were doing with his cousins in India began to flow. The amazing thing was that we didn't have to produce anything. We just had to be the idea men and middlemen in the transactions that led to the production, special customization, and transportation of Dees's designs. We had to bring in another lawyer to handle the export deals because our designs were still not legal for commercial use here in the US, and there were several trade restrictions on technology exports. But oh boy, whenever the FAA got out of control and wouldn't give us permission to fly in the United States, the sky, literally, would be the limit. I finally got a little financial relief when the court ruled in my favor in an intentional infliction of emotional distress, IID, lawsuit against Dean Winston. Turns out the guy was up to his eyeballs in debt, and the final amount paid to me after attorney fees and other costs was only $43,000. Oh well. In the meantime, I was still making good money at my day job. A few months after the divorce, life took a turn for the better. However, I began to get a little agitated. It made me laugh when I learned that the insurance agent on Dean Winston's case refused to recognize the car as a total loss, insisting on a thorough cleaning and restoration. I, like Dean, knew he would never get the smell of crap out of his upholstery. Dean continued to argue that the policeman had been there when the hooligans vandalized his car. He insisted that the camera mounted on the police car must have captured some evidence to prove his case. Calls to the State Patrol and the sheriffs of Clark and Cowlitz counties asking for the name of a police officer or deputy who might have been there came up empty. Diz and I kept our mouths shut about the crap bomb incident. We didn't really say or do anything that would raise suspicion until Donna witnessed our little exhibition today at Dee Dee's party and finally connected the dots. I put Dee Dee to bed after we got back from the house we took her friend to. Dylan went to his room and probably sat on the internet before he finally went to bed. "Did you enjoy your 12th birthday, baby girl?" I asked Dee Dee as she pulled up the blanket. It would probably only be a few months before I would no longer be welcome in her room during her nightly pre-bedtime rituals. She was definitely growing up right before my eyes. "Dade," she said quietly in mock desperation. "I'm not your child," she then giggled. I couldn't help myself. I started to cry quietly. She saw my tears and said, "Daddy, I didn't mean it. I just wanted—" "Sweetheart," I said, wrapping her in my arms, blankets and all. "You'll always be my girl." She hugged me back and said, "I know, Daddy. I know." I kissed her forehead, and as she lay down again, I looked into her eyes and said, "You're so special, Dee." She smiled at me and closed her eyes. The DNA test results claiming I wasn't the father of this girl would never see the light of day if I could help it. I couldn't know for sure, but given the way Donna had insisted that I was the one who'd given her the name, the likelihood that Dean Winston had impregnated Donna with Deanne was pretty high when he'd returned from school in Boise all those years ago. It could have been a way for Donna to laugh at me privately. I don't think she told Winston, even if she knew he might have been Deanna's sperm donor. Otherwise, she would have had to answer questions about her other lovers. And it probably would have come up when he tried to contest my claim against him. It didn't matter now, though. My kids were with me, and my cheating ex-whore had left home. I went downstairs and glanced at my watch, noting that it was only 9:10. I didn't usually answer the phone after 9, but let the answering machine pick up. I always thought it was rude for someone to call my house after 9 o'clock at night, unless it was an emergency. For some reason, however, it was tonight, when the phone rang at 9:15, that I decided to answer it. I was surprised, and pleased at the same time, to hear the voice on the other end. Sandy Malloy's voice came through my ear and said with obvious amusement in her tone, "Okay, Glenn, Do you want to tell me what that vicious slap from your ex was all about? Remember when I said this wasn't one of those stories where the cheating guy has a ready-made female company at the ready when he finally divorces his cheating wife? Well, I could be wrong. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.